What I'm going to do is, I'm going to break this presentation down into 3 sections. The first section I will talk about is basically the Quran itself. So I wrote an article for Yaqeen Institute explaining the importance of the centrality of the Quran. And a lot of people find that surprising. How can we as Muslims use the Quran or the centrality of the Quran to understand our history? So I'm going to give you a little bit about that first. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to present a little bit of what I do as a historian of how as Muslims we can decolonize the history. Because one of the problems I find is that history is taught from a perspective of a narrative. And even Muslims, they tell these stories, but it has very little historical credibility. And that's problematic for the younger generation who study history and then get shocked. Because Muslims are saying this is amazing, we were great, everything's fantastic. And then they read the history books in Western academia and they get surprised by it. And they don't know what's right and wrong. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to encourage more and more young people to invest in what you would call either ulum ad-din, the humanities, or some sort of learning of Islamic studies in some shape or form. Whether that's privately or in an institution, it's not important to me. The reason why I say that is because just as important as it is to be a doctor, an engineer and so forth, we want our children to be better in society, the most fundamental thing is we cannot lose our identity and what makes us who we are. The lack of understanding of Islam is to the detriment of the Muslim community. And so we have to find ways and mechanisms of making sure that exists so that we don't lose that. And it's harder in this country. My father and mother were migrants here. They tried to give us the best opportunities they could. And there's an assumption that because we are educated, the assumption that the younger generation has better institutions, so for some strange reason they might be better Muslims than our parents. That's not true. Our parents had Islam from osmosis. It was in the fabric of the countries they came from. And so what we're seeing is this weird push and pull struggle. On the one hand, we're improving in regards to institutions and structures and knowledge, but on the other hand, tarbiyah, akhlaq, and these things are felt like they're being lost. And this is the challenge that we have, right? So I'm going to talk about this in terms of when Muslim kids go into academia, the challenges they face in terms of learning Islamic history. And then, of course, the main topic will be on Abdul Hamid II, who is here. All right. So we started off with the Quran, and I'm going to start off with the Quran too. When Jibreel alayhi salam met Rasul sallam for the first time in the cave, he says, Iqra bismi rabbikal ladzi khalaq. I always ask my students, what did he mean by when he says Iqra? See, Iqra is a wonderful word. The first word of the Quran, Iqra, is given the Quran its name. Qara'a, to read, is where the Quran gets its name from. So the first word that's mentioned to Rasul sallam is Iqra. What's unique about this, to some degree, is that the Quran or the word Iqra has already decided or has already foretold to Rasul sallam that this is going to be a book. Right? Because what do? You read. So the fact that you're reading something means that a manifestation is going to take place where these words that I'm giving you are going to have to be turned into a book. Iqra. So when I say to my students that that's what he said, right? He said Iqra. My students said, of course. I said, is that all he said? Is that all it means? And then you can see a sense of confusion. Because the narrative that's presented regarding this interaction is very limited in our understanding. But when you read the seerah, it's a lot more complicated. When Jibreel alayhi salam says, Iqra bismi rabbikal ladzi khalaq, he doesn't take a piece of chalk and write it on the board. So what is he asking Rasul sallam to read? Here what you start to see then is my students say, it means to recite, teacher, recite. Iqra means to recite. I said, of course it does. Recite. So now we have an understanding that Iqra means to read. And we now have an understanding that Iqra means to recite. What's interesting is when you read the Masnavi of Rumi, the first word he says is listen. And some people say that is an interaction with the word Iqra. Okay? It's unique here, which is that when Jibreel alayhi salam is now telling Rasul sallam recite, why does Rasul sallam say he cannot recite? Of course he can recite. It's not difficult to recite. You say it, Iqra bismi rabbikal ladzi khalaq. He would recite it just like that. He says, I can't do it. So now what's going on? So I asked my students, what does he mean he can't recite? What's going on here? And my students are a bit stuck now, because that's the restriction of the narrative. And there was a Syrian scholar by the name of Hassan Habanaka who says the last meaning of the word Iqra means to understand. Fahem, yani, understand. And so what is Rasul saying? He's saying, I don't understand. I'm Ammi, and I'm not educated. He's the first human being to hear the miracle of Quran. He's the first human being to hear it. So when he's hearing Quran and the miracle, his brain is going, whoa, wait, what's going on here? Okay, I can't do this. This thing you're telling me to recite is beyond me. And this is unique. Why? Because the first word of the Quran, from which the Quran takes its name, tells you to read, tells you to recite, tells you to understand. The first word in itself is telling you your relationship with the book. The first word. Which sometimes people, the young students, don't understand. Which means that when you read the Quran is expecting from you to read it, of course, because it's a book. It's expecting you to recite it, so don't lose the recitation. Some people say, these people, they recite the Quran, they don't understand it. No, it's still important. Recite it. Your soul needs to hear it. You know, it's a wonderful miracle in the sense that if not all the Anbiya got miracles of the eyes, something for them to see. We got a miracle for our ears, something for us to listen to. It's timeless. And the miracle for our ears touches our soul. Here. And you have to understand what you're listening to. So the Quran then, your interaction with the Quran, please. And I say this as somebody who's studying Islamic studies, that study the Quran, make the Quran the centrality of your existence. And the Quran is telling you, read, recite, understand. Okay? We can't lose that. And so I encourage my students all the time to understand the first word of the Quran. That is sufficient for me to call it a miracle. The first word in terms of it's told me what my relationship with it is. Now after this point, what happens? Rasul goes back and he never returns to the cave. That's it. Now he's out in society. Out and about. He's now doing his business. And what's intriguing here is that sometimes I explain to my students that the reason why Rasul was attacked, he was not attacked because he was Muslim per se. He was attacked because he was inviting people to Islam. The dawah itself, the invitation is why he was attacked. The Quraysh looked at him and said, he's got something new, whatever makes him happy. But it's the fact that he was inviting people, he was challenging them, he was bringing something to the table. That's what irked them. In that sense, it's important to understand what Islam is. I am not going to tell you what Islam is here, it's a long conversation, but I want you to ask yourself that question. I already made the point of what is the Quran, I'm now making the point, what is Islam that you follow? What is it? Because many young people don't know. It's rhetorical, but they don't understand it. Okay? When the Quraysh attacked Rasul on the basis of Islam, it's not because he was inviting people to become Muslim. It's because he came to eradicate kufr, by and large. He came to change everything, right, in that sense. And that was important. And that's intriguing here, because Muslims are always focusing on, let me make this person Muslim, that, but he came to change everything. How do you treat animals? How do you treat children? How do you treat your plants and kids, cosmos, your place in it? What are you doing? Right? It's important then as a Muslim that you understand that. The reason why I'm explaining this point is my next point. As Muslims, how do we place ourselves in the timeline of history? How do we place ourselves in it? One of the things I noticed when I was teaching history to my students is they had a very myopic vision. Myopic means, or myopia means, you can only see what's in front of you. Right? And so you have this vision which is myopic. And the reason why I'm using this word is because when I ask my students, how do you imagine the future? They say hoverboards, flying cars, tall buildings. And then I say, well, where's Islam in the conversation? It's not there. They didn't imagine it. They can't think of what Islam will be like in the future. They can imagine a utopia that they see in movies like Back to the Future. This is interesting because they watch movies and movies tell them what the future could be like. They watch utopian movies and dystopian movies, Terminator 2 and Blade Runner and these type of movies, right? And so the imagination of the future is constructed for them, not from the culture of Islam. So they don't know how to make sense of it. And that for me is problematic. How do you give an imagination? So for example, I'll have young kids telling me, teacher, Hojam, the robots are going to take over. I said, why are you so confident that robots are going to take over? Because I watched it in a movie. I said, you sure Insan can create something more complex than Allah Ta'ala can create? Allah created Insan. He created you. Why do you have this belief that the machines are taking over? Because to some degree, that's the construction of the colonial project, of making you believe in the imagination of how they see the world. Allah says that, you can't even create a wing of like a fly or a mosquito. And yet we believe that we're going to create machines like the Terminator that are going to take over. It tells you about how they imagine the future. All right, so this is the way they imagine the future. How do they imagine the past? They don't imagine the past. They don't know how they place themselves in the past. So, I'll give an example. Something happens 10 years ago. How does it relate to them? 9/11, the Israeli occupation, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the Abbasids, Rasul Sallam, Adam alayhi salam. All of these things, they should have an understanding of what's happening. They're part of that timeline. And so now what I'm saying is, they don't have an understanding of the past, and they don't have an understanding of the future. All they have an understanding of is the now. That's not helpful. That's problematic. When Rasul Sallam says in the hadith of Rasul, Ummati, Ummati, what sort of ummah is he talking about? He's talking about an ummah of the future. He's visionary. The ummah till the end of time. So when you start thinking about the ummah, don't only think about the Rohingya today, or the Uyghur Muslim, or the Syrians. Think about the ummah of 100 years' time, 200 years' time, 50 years' time. You have a responsibility over that. Of course you do. It's not only of the ummah in London. It's the ummah in the timeline of history. And not only are you thinking about the ummah of the future, you are attached to the ummah of the past. You are attached to the ummah of Rasul Sallam. They bound you to an identity. That's it. You're part of that. You can't reject that. You can't now tell that ummah that that's not what ummah is. Today, I'm going to change the terms. This is what ummah is. You have to be careful how it operates. In that sense, the only way you can take your identity is from the past. And then you have to have a vision for the future. Islam is what gives you your name. You took your name from Islam. That's why you're Muslim. It's not the other way around, right? So it's not for us to determine what Islam ought to be. It's for Islam to tell you what you are. That's why you're Muslim. So you have a responsibility then. You can't just do what you want to Islam, or change it, or shift it, and evolve it in that context. That's the concern I have. So that's what I want to highlight to you. So one of the interesting things, I'm going to use this board now because I'm a little bit crazy. Okay. Yeah, I have, it's an admission, sorry. Is that when I was studying history, one of the things I noticed is this. Is you have your creed, right? Fundamental creed. And from that creed, they created a worldview, and then, I've just gone small. Knowledge, right? So you have this world where the ideas are in it, and when a child is born, a child like this is born in that worldview. Everything that's happening in that world at the time, the child is now being touched by it. They can't escape it, right? It's touching them, it's evolving them. You can try what you want, but this is part of the problem. And what this worldview does is it creates knowledge. Then this knowledge feeds back in, and then it feeds back out, and it feeds back in. Very rarely does this knowledge change the basis. Very rarely does it do that. The reason why I'm explaining this to you is because as an academic, when I write about history, Islam is not here. Islam is not here. Islam is not here. And Islam is not there. Sometimes what we try to do is we take some knowledge of Islam and we try to pump it in. We think we can Islamize the worldview. It's difficult. Especially as an academic, it's hard. It's already coming from a particular basis. I'll give you an example. When I was writing once, I wrote, Allah says in the Quran. And one of my academic colleagues says, you can't write that. I said, well, okay, but we're academics, you write the name of the author. And I said, who's the author? He goes, don't go down this direction. I said, okay, fine. So if you don't want me to write the name of the author, then what do I write? He goes, the Quran says. The Quran says. And I went, wow. So you just took my relationship with that book away from me. In that one stroke, as an academic, I conditioned myself by taking that relationship away. Now, when people are reading that over and over, what it does is it diminishes the value of Quran. It diminishes it. Now, some people will say, Yaqub, you're going too far. Maybe, it's possible. But I want to make you aware of it, of how it operates. So, what I noticed is that the language of academia has a secular consciousness in it. It's built in the language. It's very hard. So when I was saying to you before, when you read Islamic works in the past, it'll be a Muslim alim talking for Muslims. Just like today. I started off by explaining Quran. I wouldn't do that in a Western academic talk. I say, how's it going, people? By the way, so Sultan Abdul Hamid II, let's talk about the evidences, right? But because we're Muslim here, I'm trying to make this relatable for you to help you understand the challenges I face, someone like me, in terms of how do you navigate that space. Right, so it has a secular consciousness in it because the creed is secular, which means it creates a secular worldview, which means when the knowledge comes out, it's also secular, stripping it away. What can we do? One of the problems is language itself. So let's look at language. All right, I put Quran at the top. There's a reason for that. So after Quran came Arabic. What Quran did to Arabic is it Islamized Arabic. So Arabic existed before Quran. Then Quran came, touched the Arabic, elevated it, Islamized it, right? In that sense, Arabic became important for learning Islam. And then what we had is we call it the, I don't know, can you guys see on that side as well? I'll try and go backwards and forwards. Sorry. We have the Islamicate languages. What that means is that this Arabic then touched Persian, Albanian, Turkish, Urdu, Jawi, which is Malay. All of these languages became Islamized. These languages submitted to Islam, right? So the Islam is fused in them. The reason why I'm explaining this to you is because if you can't learn Arabic, it's okay, at least understand your Islamicate language. Understand Turkish, understand Urdu, understand Farsi, understand Jawi. There's still enough Islam in those languages to safeguard you. Many of the ulama would still write in those languages. So if you think that Arabic is difficult for me to learn, which it could be, don't lose these languages. Don't lose them, because at the moment, there's been a huge smash on these languages. So Turkish is now written in a Turkish Latin script, not in the Arabic anymore. In Malaysia, they have Jawi, which is the Arabic script, and in Malay, which is the Latin script. Albanian is the same. The smashing that's taking place, right? And then we have the non-Islamicate languages. And these are called modern languages. Okay, there's his name, English, French, German. They're modern. Arabic is not seen as modern language, by the way. Neither is the Islamicate languages. But these languages are. But these languages didn't submit to Islam. They weren't written in the Arabic script. They didn't take on the Islamic words. They didn't do any of that. And I'll give you an example regarding translation. Namaz and Salah translate smoothly. Okay, because the language became Islamized. So even though the words are different, they submitted to Islam. But prayer doesn't help you here. As I'm going to pray, mate. Well, why don't you pray tonight? Why do you have to pray now? Because you can't understand, right? And what's interesting about the modern languages is what they did is they translated some words and they didn't translate other words. Jihad, khilafah, blah, blah, blah. Those are messy words. We're not going to translate them. Allah forbid we translate those words. So they kept them messy so that you're afraid of those words. Right? So you have words that are translated and words that are not translated. Here you start to see, for me as an academic who's looking at the text, I can see already the language is doing something. The language is loaded. And even in the language alone. So they'll say the Hamidian regime, not the Hamidian government. There's a reason for that. You start to think, oh, regime. Oh, the guy. Even today when we use the word sultan, it's used in a pejorative sense. Oh, the Muslims and the Sultan and so forth. He must be backwards. He must be an absolutist, so forth. Let's look at even America. The Trump administration. The way they use the language is to distance themselves. They won't say the Trump regime. They'll say, okay, this is the American and the Trump administration. We'll put it to a side. Language here is important. Why am I going to language? Because I just told you just now, the Iqra, the first word of the Quran, is very precise. Allah Ta'ala in the Quran is precise with his language use. Every single word is in its rightful place. And every single word is used for a specific reason. When you read, when you write, I want you to check carefully the words you are reading. Don't be ignorant. And when you write, and I know a lot of people don't like writing, but when you write, I keep now telling my students, why did you use that word? Why that word? Why not this one? I don't know, just that's what it sounded like. Don't do that. Okay? So here, what I'm trying to explain to you is one of the challenges I have as a historian is when I'm studying about Islamic history, It's firstly told from this point of view. When Muslims write it, generally Muslims are defensive. And then what's happening is being predominantly written from the non-Islamic languages. That's where the dominance is. So the majority of works produced on Ottoman history are English, then Turkish, and then forget Arabic, Urdu and all that. It's non-existent. Yet the primary source data is here. And now we have a situation. So a lot of young kids who don't know these languages, you remember when I said about the colonization? You lost those languages, you can't speak them, you can't read them, you're disconnected from your past. You have a situation. Okay? Now they can't read their own history. And once you become disconnected from that history, then that's when the problems begin. So that's something I need you to consider. So history then, when we're doing history, it's not just stories. Okay? History is ideology. We construct your memories. We construct your ideas. We construct your identity. We tell you what your past is. We're actually time travelers. That's what we are. We go back in time, we change it, and then when you read it, you think that's my identity. That's what happened. Are you sure that's what happened? So the point I'm making is, with this here, is when you pick up a book, ask yourself, why is this correct? Why is it right? Why do I believe it? Who's the author? What's the idea of the author? Where was the author educated? What else has the author written? Don't just pick it up and read it and say, that's what history said. Because that's what a lot of my young students, they'll say, but teacher, I read it in a history book. Which book? I got it from the library. Why is it right? I watched the documentary. I read on Wikipedia. It's not sufficient. We wouldn't do that in fiqh. We wouldn't do that in Sharia. We wouldn't do that with Quranic studies. Why are we doing it with history? Why are we being so sloppy? Okay, we shouldn't be sloppy. So my point is, and I know I'm boring, I'm a historian, and it's like people, history is boring, it sucks. And the reason is because when we teach you history, we teach you dates, numbers. This happened, and this happened, and this happened. I'm not going to do that with you. Today I'm going to teach you about Sultan Abdul Hamid II and explain to you why he should be important and relatable for you. But generally I wanted to start off with the idea of why history should be important. You don't have to be a historian. You don't have to go to university. But you can be invested in your past. You can read, you can write, and those who can't read and write, then people who can read and write, speak to them. Our tradition is an oral tradition. We weren't illiterate. Our tradition was just different. So people would go to a madrasa and read to everybody and they'll listen. And they would understand. That was sufficient. Remember when I said Quran, recite, it was sufficient for them. So in that sense, if you can't read and write, it's not a problem. But we should have people in our communities who can. Invest in it. I have students in Turkey who say, teacher, I just want to be a housewife. No problem. You want to be a housewife? Be a housewife. But don't stop reading and writing. You can still do that. The university circuit is a 19th century institution that's struggling in the 21st century. We now have videos, internet, social media. There are many different mechanisms you can use to learn. One of the most important mechanisms is don't lose your teacher. Don't lose that. We need teachers in our communities. Rasul Sallam was a teacher. And the Quran, when he was taught, the pedagogy of Islam is that we teach human to human. So he's not only teaching you the words of Allah Ta'ala, he's teaching you the behavior. He's teaching you how to think. He's investing in you. Right? And that's how the pedagogy of Islamic studies is. Somebody has to exist and they have to show you. Western pedagogy is interesting. The book is sufficient. They write it in a way where you can understand just by reading the book. But Islamic studies is written in a way where it has to be taught. That's our culture. It has to be taught. A human being has to be embodied. Rasul Sallam was taught by Jibreel alayhi salam. Also he was taught. He had a teacher. So don't lose that understanding of that pedagogy, okay? So I know this is not about Sultan Abdul Hamid yet. Everyone's like, well, I'll get to the Sultan. But I just wanted to make that point because when I teach history, these are one of the points that I see that's missing in the Muslims. And when I was saying this here, one of the interesting things, last point, is this word here, modernity. Modernity is an idea. It's a value system. Okay, it's an ideology. What does it mean to be modern? And when I ask my students, can Islam be modern? It's a really interesting answers I get. Some of them say to me, of course, teacher, of course we can be modern. Islam can be modern. And I say, okay, great. Why you say that? Because we're not backwards people. Islam moves along. We can do that. I say, great. And then I'll get a group of students saying, no, wait, hang on a minute. Islam can't be modern. That's like kufr, you saying that. Why? And I go, whoa, take it easy. But I understand the sentiment. There's a trick question. The question is incorrect. Why does Islam have to be compared with modernity? Why do we have to say whether Islam is modern or not? It doesn't need it. It wasn't needed in the past. Why is it needed now? This is a unique thing from the 19th century onwards. The idea of what it means to be modern. What it means to be modern means to be European. What it means to progress is European progress. Tech, moving forward, and so forth. And do you remember when I said it's myopic? Okay, so progress is going up like this, right? Progress is going up. But where's it going? Nobody knows. We're progressing as people, but progressing to what? What's the end game? What's the imagination? What progress does is it's not actually telling you about the future. Progress is the now. Step by step. That's progress. And progress is still seen from the Western context. To be a progressive human being doesn't mean a person who prays 5 times a day. Could you imagine? I go to uni and say, we're progressing, we're praying now. All of us. What are you talking about? That's not progress. So what is progress? What does it mean to be modern in this context? Once again, language matters. Language is loaded. Understand what you're internalizing. And you get Muslims even talking now, we are civilized, we are modern, living in the modern world. And that the opposite of modern would be tradition. That's the opposite. We don't need to use that language. Never in the history of humanity was this used before. Why is it being used now? Because it's value laden. Okay? So one of the points I'm trying to do to some degree is trying to decolonize your mind a little bit. Let's start. I'm not saying I'm going to be able to do that, but I want you to think at least. That the language you're using in terms of understanding yourself as a Muslim in the timeline you fit in is how do you fit. I get a lot of young people who say to me, why is this happening to me? It's not fair. Life sucks. Why is Allah doing this to me? You know why? Because they see themselves in the center. And then they do this, and Allah's here. And all their responsibilities are like that. It's the wrong way around. It's not for you to determine your relationship with Allah. It's for Allah to determine His relationship with you. Technically, it should be Allah is the center, and your relationship. What do you do now? You're not that important. In the timeline of history then, you're just a moment. If you think about it, you're an important moment for Allah, but you're just a moment. And why this is important is because now, this is my last point. The idea of ummah is meta. It's beyond you, bigger. The idea of Allah is meta, right? The idea of belonging to the universe and the cosmos is meta. The idea of history is meta. It's supposed to remind you that you're this small. You're not that big. And that everything else is more important than you. But what progress, what modernity has done, is has made you, the individual, the most important thing. The now, the most important thing. And so you destroy the planet. You do what you want to it. Because you think you own it. When in actuality, you're custodian. It's an amana. What are you going to say to Allah, what you did to the planet? When you look at your past and the way you place yourself in it, how do you place yourself in it? Okay, so once again, I want to stress this to you. Have a vision for the future. Have an imagination. Allah Ta'ala gives you imaginations in the Quran. When He tells you, and Nuh alayhi salam, you weren't there, but He tells you what happened. He gives you an imagination of the past. And Musa alayhi salam, and Yusuf. Okay, but not only that, He tells you, and Jannah looks like this. And Jahannam looks like that. And He describes it to you with words. Remember I said words are important. Words are important. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is trying to break this down for you in this context.